All right, welcome to our Thursday night New York Giants Preservation Society meeting for June 2nd. Hopefully not the beginning of the infamous June swoon with the Giants. Tonight we got a double feature, so to speak, with Stu Thornley and Dan Vandemortel from my old stomping grounds in SUNY Albany. They're going to talk about the Polo Grounds and the Titanic. So it should be a wonderfully interesting evening. Looking forward to the next couple of weeks. Next Thursday, we got Bill Lamb, who's coming back to speak about the New York Giant ownership from 1903 to 1957. Basically from John Brush until Horace Stoneham. And then later on in the year, Rob Garrett will finish up the triumvirate and talk about Giant ownership from 1958 to the present day in San Francisco. After Bill, we will have the great Marty Appel. Marty is well known for his affiliation with the New York Yankees, but he wrote a wonderful book on Casey Stengel, and a lot of Casey Stengel time is with the New York Giants, learning under John McGraw, and also playing for the Giants. So
that's a great one about an umpire too, Eric Gregg.
Hey, there you go. Hey, Perry, how are you? But for now, I'm going to turn the mic over to.
Can we just make sure everybody mutes themselves? I already hear noise in the background. If everybody can just mute themselves to fair.
I think we're good to go. Hopefully. It's very hard, especially when somebody comes in. When we have more than one screen, I can't see everybody coming in. So with that being said, let's turn it over and give a nice welcome to two of our members who are also authors, Dan and Stu. Welcome, guys. I don't know who's starting, whatever you guys decide, and then we'll go from there.
Stu, do you want to go first, or I'll go first?
Oh, I don't know. I thought you were going, but either way is fine with me.
Okay, I'll roll. So Gary, if you want to put the first picture up.
Yeah, you want to talk a little bit about what you're doing first, and then I'll get the pictures up. How's that?
Well, basically, we're here to talk about a 1912 exhibition game that was held at the Polo Grounds between the Giants and the Yankees, who actually weren't the Yankees at that time, but there's more on that later. And it was a exhibition game held by the two teams to raise funds for the families and loved ones and the survivors of the Titanic. And it was a really great moment in New York City history, the way everyone rallied to the cause. And it's actually a nice baseball story too, something that the sport should be very proud of. And I don't think there's really a lot of awareness of it, oddly, given how much there is about the Titanic out there. So I'm going to talk about the game itself and how it came to be. And when I did the research on this, one of the more fascinating things I found was just the new Polo Grounds that the game was held at. It was a beautiful ballpark by the day's standards. So Stu is going to talk about that, the history before that field, and then after, and he's got lots of pictures to show of the Polo Grounds.
All right, let's hopefully get this for you. Okay, now we're gonna go like this. We're gonna go like this. We're gonna go to pictures.
Saw the family.
Yep, I still have them. Now we're gonna look for your stuff, and it should be right here. How about that?
That's it.
Some of your pictures did not get bigger when you sent them, just so you know, Dan, okay?
Oh, okay. They were bigger on my side, but who knows how it translates. So the genesis of the article, I did an article on this game, and it appeared in this publication, which was put out by the Society for American Baseball Research. And the reason I actually wanted to show it to you all, since you're all from New York or huge New York fans, this came out in 2017. It's available on Amazon. I'm not getting any money out of it, so that's not the reason I'm shilling it. But it has a lot of articles on moments in baseball history, and some of them would be kind of obscure. So I would encourage you, if you have interest in that, to pick it up. And Gary will, when he sends his email out tomorrow, he'll have the link on how you can purchase it. If you're running into any problems, let me know. I'll try to grease the skids. When I did this article, when I came to the polo grounds portion, that's when I connected with Stu, because the rule of baseball research is if you're doing anything on the polo grounds, you go to Stu. Stu is the walking encyclopedia on it. He's written books about it. If only he had been there. So we kind of got connected on that, just swapping a few pictures back and forth. And that's why we're doing the joint presentation here today. Next, Gary.
Okay, let me go.
So here we have a classic picture that just tells a story that we all know. There's the Titanic in the North Atlantic. You can see the iceberg. I'd like to say that I have evidence that this never happened and that it was all just a hoax, but unfortunately that is not the case. It was a sad ending. What strikes me is how much this still resonates 110 years later, and how we all learn about this at a very early age. I mean, I was 7 years old when I learned about the Titanic. I think it's almost impossible not to learn about it, just with all the books and the magazines, the movies. It has a shelf life that just keeps on keeping on. And a lot of things we get exposed to through this story at a very early age. We learn about class for the first time because of the richer people were at the top, the poorer people were at the bottom, the middle people were in the middle. We learn about the rule of the sea, or the law of the sea, which is women and children go first off the ship. Unfortunately, we learn the tragic example that there should always be enough lifeboats on a ship or a boat, and that was not the case here. They didn't even have half the amount of lifeboats that they could have, and a lot of the lifeboats that were let go from the ship weren't even full. So it's a disaster, and it could have been a little bit, it could have been handled a little bit better, and it really wasn't. And then the other thing that sticks with this is that the band played on. There's always that phrase, the band played on, and that the Titanic's band members really did do that up until the last few minutes. But regrettably, they could not stop the ship from sinking. And about 1,500 people died, which was about 2/3 of the crew and the passengers. It's still the deadliest peacetime sinking of a superliner or a cruise ship today. So when we think about this, we kind of think, well, what part of the world was impacted the most? And a lot of people would think London or Belfast, where it was built. I would offer that actually, I think New York was, because this is where the ship was heading to. This is where it was going to land. And this is where everyone was waiting for it. If there had been a successful landing or arrival, it would have been a tremendous event. And the fact that it wasn't turned it into a traumatic event. Gary, next pick.
Okay.
No.
This is what came up third on yours. This is the next one after that.
No. Should be President Taft.
There he is.
Yeah, there we go. Yep.
Hold on.
You went past it. Yep.
There he is.
So here we have the president of the time. We go back to the time of the Titanic. Here was President William Howard Taft. Not much of a president, but he was the first president to throw out an opening day pitch. And he once declared that any man who would choose a day's work over a day of baseball is a fool not worthy of friendship, which I think is a sentiment sometimes we've all shared. But he kind of contrasted with his times. It was a very busy time. The Model T Ford was coming off the assembly line. People were gobbling it up. People were moving from the country to the city. The world was speeding up. People were using a lot of the new technology at the time, such as cameras, movies, telephones, telegraphs. It was really sort of the entry level to kind of like the age that we have now, where we went from a rural-based economy to kind of started becoming more of an urban economy. And New York City really embodied, probably more than any place in the United States, really embodied this. The first skyscraper had been built a few years before, and there was a building boom going on in Manhattan that was just unbelievable. Would have been unbelievable just a generation earlier. The city's boroughs had just recently consolidated, boosting the city's population to 5.2 million, which made it second to London in the world. And some of the residents were even traveling on the new subway that opened up just a few years before 1912. And for baseball fans, Ebbets Field had broken ground in 1912, so that was going to be on the horizon, or was on the horizon, and would have been in effect in the next year or two. The city was very interesting at the time. It was really a city of immigrants. 80% of the city's inhabitants were either government immigrants or their children. A lot of ebb and flow in the city at this time. Not a place where it's just like generations and generations that had lived there. Gary, next picture, the one that shows the size of the Titanic. Yep. So there was a lot of anticipation in the New York press and amongst people. They were really excited about the Titanic's arrival, which was going to be on April 17th on a Wednesday. And the papers just ran with this. And this was a picture that showed in a number of them. And it just showed the immense size of the Titanic. If you compare it to the pyramid on the right and the Washington Monument on the left, this was a technological marvel, which made it all the more sad when it perished. And so the excitement in the city was really palpable. You would have felt it if you were just talking with friends and neighbors and whatnot. But as the week kind of dragged in, the ship actually sank on Monday. And as the news began to filter in, there was a kind of a growing sense of unease and confusion. There were some facts that were relayed, but some of it was just speculation. And the damage fatalities really wavered all over the place. And Gareth, you'll show the picture of the newspaper. This is a classic headline from the Baltimore newspaper that said, "All saved from the Titanic after the collision." And if that was so, if only that was so. Unfortunately, that was wild optimism. And that the results over 1,000 miles away in the Atlantic had been a lot deadlier than this. So as the hours marched by, it really turned into, if you think of 9/11, there's the event, but then right after that, there's the hellish moments and days of waiting, not knowing what the damage is, who died, is anyone still alive? And again, facts, speculation. There were a lot of tales being thrown about of heroism, some of cowardice, some true, some false. Just think of all the fun that social media could have with this for a few days while everyone just sat around waiting for something. So sitting back, basically the news did come in that it was a fatality. It was the ship sank, and flags at the city throughout the city were flown at half mast. And Gary, if you pull up the next picture, please. People began to gather on the streets of New York. Here is the largest gathering site. This is where the Titanic's White Star Line headquarters were. This was at 11 Broadway, which is down at the southern tip of Manhattan. And crowds of up to 50,000 would gather here, trying to get information from officials or reading what they had as like boards where they would post information or the latest and greatest news or speculation. So people would just go down there to try to figure out what was going on. But this scene was really being played out citywide. People were gathering at hotels, bars, you name it, stores, other buildings, just trying to get whatever information they could. And it wasn't just the people who might have had relatives on it or just for some reason were fascinated by the ship, or just even people who were just unconnected with it. It just really began to affect everyone because it was just a feel in New York that this was a visceral feeling of dread and sadness. So on Thursday, Gary, if you go to the next picture, the one where the ship goes by the Statue of Liberty.
Carpathia.
So on Thursday, here is the Carpathia. That is the ship that was out in the Atlantic and came and rescued the 712.
Hold on one second. Jay, I can't get to the screen. You gotta mute.
All right. So here we have the Carpathia coming into New York. That was a ship that was out in the Atlantic and came and rescued the roughly 712 survivors who were in the lifeboats. And it went by the Statue of Liberty. There were about 10,000 people who gathered there to watch the ship go by. And then eventually it arrived at New York's Pier 54, which is roughly south of 14th Street along the West Side Highway. I don't, you New Yorkers can probably sum it better than I can, but that's roughly where it is. When it docked at the pier, there was a heavy security presence, medical personnel swarmed on the scene, and tons of people who just wanted to know what was going on. And I thought the New York Times described the scene the best, where it referred to a low wailing sound that started from the crowd. Its cadences, wild and weird, grew steadily louder and louder until they culminated in a mighty shriek that swept the pier as if guided by some master hand.
Oh, okay.
So this was, this does have notes of 9/11 somewhat, I think. And there's another reason too that the city really took this story to heart. There were, as I mentioned, there were over 1,500 victims. But there were, if you add up the number of city natives, residents, and people traveling to New York just to go to New York, we come up with about 233 people. And of those, 129 died, including people from all various parts of the social spectrum. So it really kind of impacted the city on a wide level. Also, I think people in the city then remembered a horrible event that had happened only a few years prior when a steamer called the General Slocum, which was filled with families from the Lower East Side. It caught fire on the East River. This was in 1904, and it killed 1,021 people, which is still the city's worst pre-9/11 tragedy. So the nerves were still a little bit raw from that, and when this happened. So that kind of accounts for the empathy. And the empathy really translated very quickly into a lot of relief. The mayor opened a relief fund. Prominent women's organization did the same. Newspapers called for contributions and whatnot. And at least, by my tally, at least 6 or 7 million was raised pretty quickly. There could have been more after that, but these were just like in the immediate days, which is a lot of money now, but it definitely was a lot of money, an extreme amount of money back then. It was basically all hands on deck. Hospitals contributed beds, medical people donated their time, even persons of modest means. Everyone just kind of pitched in and did what they could. Gary, next picture, John Brush. So probably the most, perhaps the most unexpected relief overture came from this man. This is the New York Giants owner, John T. Brush. And this picture doesn't look like someone who would be too keen to give relief to anyone. He doesn't look like a happy chap, at least not in this picture. But he did a really generous, magnanimous thing. He reached out to the Yankees owner, Frank Farrell, and offered his Polo Grounds for a Sunday exhibition game to raise money for the survivors and friends and families. This doesn't seem quite so unusual if you think about it now, but for him to reach out at this time was actually a pretty big deal and unexpected. And there's really two reasons for that. He really went against the grain on two levels by making this offer. First, the two teams really didn't get along. They had a very uneven relationship. He viewed the Yankees and the American League as basically an inferior product. In the 1904 World Series, he refused to play the American League. He didn't want the American League in existence. He definitely didn't want another New York team in New York. Things began to thaw a little bit in 1910 when when the two teams played after the season, they played a best of 7 series. Which was sort of unique at the time. And Gary, you mentioned Marty Appel.
Yeah.
He's written a very interesting article on this, and he was really helpful on me, like tipping me off onto this game and having a lot of details. So, but I think the reason this thaw came at that time is because the players received a considerable amount of money to play in this series. So I think it was more like the wallets talk rather than, well, we're all just going to learn to love each other. There was a better offer that came on board in 1911 when the Polo Grounds burned down, and Stu will talk about that. And Frank Farrell, the Yankees owner, offered to the Giants, you can use our ballpark, Hilltop Park, for 3 months while you rebuild, and that's what they did. So that's kind of where things stood in 1912. And the other real obstacle to try to do this game was that there were Sunday blue laws in effect. And Sunday blue laws just came over from England, and they prohibited basically a lot of Sunday activities. And the American League and the National League were both on board with this. And it was hard to get exceptions to that. And so in 1912, the Giants could not play on Sunday, and they actually would not be able to until 1919. Gary, go to Frank Farrell, please.
Hold on. So maybe that's the one we had out of order before.
Just keep that one on. Keep the one you went by. Go back to
This one?
the one where the two men are shaking it. Yeah, leave it on that. Cool.
Yep.
Thanks. I'm sorry, that's the wrong one. Flip around.
I think I know where it is. Let me just try it. That it?
Go with that. Yeah. So here we have the Yankees owner, Frank Farrell, the man in the coat on the left. He took Brush's offer, and somewhat unexpectedly, in some quarters, he ran with it. So both owners immediately agreed to do it. They even issued a written statement indicating that they would do it, and how it was all based on just providing relief to everyone. And they never did explain why the blue laws got blown over. But I think Farrell had some experience a few years prior with a couple of games of getting some charity games going. So maybe he just knew how to work the system. And again, New York was in a very charitable, giving, empathetic mood. So maybe the powers that be just thought, we just got to let this go in this one instance. Okay, now Gary, if you can go to the picture of the two men shaking hands.
Yep.
So as we get ready for the game, it really was really a tale of two different teams. On the left here, we have the Yankees manager, a chap by the name of Harry Wolverton, who coached 1 year, and that was 1912. And he presided over a 50 win, 102 loss club. And then he was done. But that's really not all in him. The Yankees were just not a very good team then. They were always in the second division. In fact, they actually weren't even quite called the Yankees at that time. They wouldn't become the Yankees officially until the following year. And they had a whole bunch of names, including the Highlanders, which was their official name for 1912. And if you look at the picture of Harry Wolverton here, he has kind of like a beaten down look, like he's there shaking John McGraw's hand. That's the manager of the Giants, but he doesn't really look 100% happy to be doing it. And he might have reflected his team somewhat. It was kind of a bedraggled organization at that time. If you look at John McGraw, then you see sort of the opposite. He looks kind of confident, like he's okay. Let's get this game going here. And his Giants were a juggernaut at this time. They were going to go to the World Series that year, 1912. They'd been there the year before. They'd won it in 1905, always in first place. And they were really the epitome of the small ball type of approach in this era. They stole and they stole and they stole. They had actually stolen 347 bags the year before. And John McGraw never met any situation where he didn't want to send the runner. Completely the opposite of modern day baseball. And so basically they had one other advantage that the Giants had that the Yankees did not have. And I put the word advantage in quotation marks. And Gary, if you can go to the picture of Charles Faust. So they decided for the Titanic game to bring their mascot out onto the field. This is Charles Faust, who is a 31-year-old, kind of a hick, kind of a hayseed guy, kind of a weirdo guy who came onto the team the year before. And he just kind of materialized. Instead, a fortune teller had told him the Giants would win the World Series if McGraw let him pitch. So McGraw actually kept him on the team, figuring, well, maybe there's some superstition there, and baseball was very superstitious at the time. So they kind of kept Faust around, and then he did some pregame warm-up. He would throw the ball left-handed. He would goof around and all that. And the team actually was 36-2 by keeping him around. So he kind of did well. But then they lost the 1911 World Series And that was kind of the end of them. McGraw soured on them and whatnot. But they thought for the Titanic game, hey, let's bring this guy back. We could use the good luck. He'll put fannies in the stands. People will eat up his pregame entertainment, and it'll all work out. So he was kind of brought back. So there's their kind of like their rabbit's foot that they were going to use for the game. Gary, if you go to, I guess, go to the picture of the man with who's, thank you. So as the game started on Sunday, this is April 21st. It was a beautiful day at Coogan's Bluff. And the brush came by limousine, and Farrell also arrived. A number of other people from both organizations stopped by and were there throughout the game. And basically everyone from the entire city came. It was like a mix of everyone, rich, poor, Wall Street people, Broadway people, really just like a little bit of everything from the city. And one unique person who showed up was this person there in the cap with the newspapers, and that's George M. Cohen. I don't know how familiar some of you are with musical history, but he's one of the icons of Broadway. We kind of regarded as basically the father of Broadway. And he had spent his entire day hawking newspapers around the city like that, carrying them around like a newsboy with his assistant there. And doing that, and he came to the game and he worked the crowd throughout the game. He still kept selling newspapers. So this really just shows that this wasn't something where just only average people wanted to do things. Even the rich and the famous got their hands dirty in this relief effort. And Gary, if you go to the next picture of the Giants. So here we have the Giants entering the stadium. And as I mentioned before, they were good and they knew they were good. I mean, they had swagger. They really had a swagger. When they went on the road, it's almost like they invaded a town. They drank and swore like sailors. You know, the way they would enter the field with the swagger they have, it almost is a little bit like the WWE when the bad guys come on and everyone's kind of, if they were on the road, people would start booing, but they loved it. They just thrived on it. So here they are coming onto the field, and you can tell it almost looks like an arriving army ready to do battle. And the Yankees came on too. They would have their road gray on. The Giants had their white. And the umpires showed up. 2 umpires volunteered their time, and even they got a nice warm welcome before the game, which is not a very common thing in baseball history. And this game really had a kind of like a World Series feeling to it. There were movie men and photographers who moved around, a lot of pictures taken. There was really definitely a buzz in the stands. Around 3 o'clock, the game started. It was announced because the Giants, the umpires took megaphones and then announced the starting batteries by megaphone and then announced the start of the game. So from there it was game on. Gary, if you go to the next picture of the women, thank you. Just as the game started, the New York female Giants started combing the stands, also asking for relief money, kind of like George Cohen had been doing. And this was something I'd never heard of. So the New York female Giants, I found this really interesting. They were a group of women, 32 women who played ball throughout the city. And the Giants would actually come and watch them. And sometimes would actually, were rumored to actually play with them. These were serious ballers. I mean, they may not look so imposing now, but these women, if they played, this was hardball. This was not messing around or like a slow pitch softball game. They played hard. And the connection is that it's still somewhat unknown and tenuous, but most people feel that this had something to do with John McGraw, because he frequented Broadway, and one of the principal people on the team, or persons on the team, performed in Broadway. And however it worked, the Giants approved of them. They sat in the box in the front row in the box seats. And as I said, when the game started, then they worked the stands and started soliciting funds. And Gary, if you'll put up the next pic. Here we have them looking much nicer and dressed up for the affair. The caption here is not accurate. These are not chorus girls. This is actually the female Giants as they dressed up for this game. And you can see this is a very formal affair, partly because they took it seriously, but also just look at the dress of the time. The suits, the derby hats, the plumage, the tray hats. These were tray hats that the women war. So they basically combed the aisles, and then as the game started, they pretty much did it throughout the game. Just they had their hand out asking for money, and people gave. So Gary, just leave that picture up, and then I'll talk a little bit about the game. I'm not going to go into the whole like who was on first, who was on second, and all that. If somebody really wants to know that, I can send a box score around, or maybe I can give it to Gary and he can post it. But the Giants, so Giants batted last. The Yankees batted first, and they were really at a disadvantage because Wolverton decided to not really play any starters except for maybe one person. But they got off to they scored one run in the first inning, seemed kind of promising. But then unfortunately the Giants batted. And then it was just an onslaught, lots of hits. And they just ran and ran and ran. There was the first of 2 double steals in that inning. Some solo bags were swiped. The Yankees threw the ball around. Think of like a bad slow pitch softball game where there's a bad team playing and they've never met each other and they're throwing the ball around. You'll kind of get the idea. The poor Yankees catcher, a hapless soul by the name of Gus Fisher, all 5'10", 175 pounds of him. Not exactly a catcher's material now. He got to the point where he wasn't even sure where to throw by the end of it. And he actually got credit in the game, or in one of the game accounts, for actually not throwing. Everyone was just glad that he didn't throw the ball and just start the circus all the way around. Giants came to bat in the second inning, got another run. Not much happened until the fourth inning. And then the onslaught had again, like it was just more stolen bases, more hits, walks, errors. I mean, there were individual errors, but then there was just all sorts of unclassifiable infield and outfield folly. It was just a circus. The Yankees were just they were just bad, and the Giants were good, but some of it was just the Yankees being bad. From that point on, basically, as Marv Albert would say, it was extended garbage time. This game was completely out of hand, and the Giants ended up winning it 11-2. And it wasn't even that close. The only thing of note that happened after that was in the sixth inning. And why this would happen at the Titanic exhibition game, I have no idea. But a fight broke out in the stands, and the police had to separate it. It maybe had something to do with betting. I don't know. But the only thing I'm sure of is that the Yankees fans who were there probably welcomed the relief, because it was a long day for the fans and the team. The fans who were in attendance, you see some here, but they were scattered around the park, kind of had some refreshments like they would now, but kind of different. There was no booze because it was Sunday. They did eat hot dogs because that was kind of a new offering at the Polo Grounds. But one thing on the menu were pie slices. And I've never been, I don't know if any of you ever been to a ball game where they offer pie as a refreshment. I guess that's just a thing of the time, but I'd like to bring that back. I think a nice dish of raspberry pie would be really good, especially if they'd offer milk with it. So I don't know, maybe baseball needs to market a little bit more. As I mentioned, the tally was grim for the Yankees. I'm just not going to go there. It just to suffice to say it was awful. But the numbers that really mattered was that there were about 14,000 people that showed up. They raised about $275,000 at the game, and then Cohen raised another $600,000 that day from his efforts before the game, at the game, and then selling newspapers after the game. So that was the really good cause, and really the numbers were good. That was a good effort to get the relief. But what really the bigger picture here was that baseball really offered just a place where people could go and get away from a depressing week, much like the value that the World Series would have had after 9/11. Yes, it's just baseball, it's only sports, but it gives people a diversion. And they had just had the New York population just had a brutal week. So just for those who went there, or they could read about it, it just provided a lifeline. And baseball really stepped up to the plate on this. And it was a really good example of what the quote national pastime can really do in a time of need. And with that, I'll turn it over to Stu.
First, Dan, thank you so much. What we'll do is we'll turn it over to Stu. And then when Stu's done, anybody in the audience who wants to ask questions of Stu or Dan can do that. So Stu, it's all yours.
Good deal. You can see a diagram of ballparks. I'm not sure if this is going to cycle through well or not, or I might ask Gary to take it over. I'm hoping I can advance. Yeah, I think I can advance slides. Dan said I'm an encyclopedia on the Polo Grounds. Well, that's about it. An encyclopedia. Got a lot of facts stuffed in my head. Learned a lot about it. It doesn't compare to the knowledge that many of you have who have actually been there. You know, you just can't compare facts and figures with actually having been at the Polo Grounds. Although I'm guessing that nobody out there in the audience was ever at this version of the Polo Grounds, the original one. One of the wonders of this ballpark, there are many, but it's just the name, you know, Polo Grounds. So when I was a kid and heard that, and I'm sure many people wondered about it over time. And the answer, of course, is that the original field that bore this name was a polo field just north of Central Park, at the northeast corner of Central Park, just beyond it. It had been polo. They started playing professional baseball there in 1880, and 3 years later, they had two major league teams, the National League team and a new team in the American Association, the Metropolitan. This is a nice diagram that the late Sabre member Larry Zuckerman put together. Larry did a lot of great diagrams like this, and I'm grateful for this one. There were two diamonds. In fact, when we count Polo Grounds, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Some people count as 5. I count this original one as Polo Grounds 1 that had two diamonds, one on the west end and 6th Avenue and the other on the east side. And the east side was a much nicer grandstand. And there's some uncertainty, at least in my mind. Some people claim to be certain of this, but I think the mark of a good researcher is being skeptical. I don't know if I'm a good researcher, but I'm definitely skeptical. But they built two diamonds there for each of the teams, the National League team to have the one on the east and the Metropolitan, the association team on the west. It was definitely built for that purpose. It also definite is that the West Diamond was not ready in time on May 15th when the association opened its home season. So the Metropolitan team had to play on the East Diamond, which they did for a couple of weeks. Finally, on Decoration Day, well, there was no choice. They had to go to two diamonds because both teams were at home at the same time. They both played double headers. There was also the college championship being played that day. So a canvas fence delineated the boundaries between the two ballparks on that. Both teams were home for a couple of weeks, so they left the same configuration. And then late in the season, in August and into September, the same thing, both teams home at the same time, so they had to use both diamonds simultaneously. A question that I've never solved to my satisfaction is what happened in between that when the American Association had the Polo Grounds to itself. And a lot of sources out there will say that they then played on the East Diamond, that it was nicer and they decided we'll just use the West Diamond when necessary. And that may be the case. David Nemec, a credible source, very good researcher, his 19th century encyclopedia is outstanding. And he puts down that only 13 games were played on the West Diamond, which would indicate that they played only in these two parts of the season where both teams were home at the same time. But when I asked David about his source of information, he referred me to somebody else who was also a good researcher, and that person gave me some reasons that I didn't find convincing. So I'm in the, would love to find out someday, maybe I'll do some more digging and if anybody does know the answer, but I have no idea how many games were played on that West Diamond, but it was used only 1 year. By the next year, the Metropolitan had another ballpark, a pretty cruddy place on the East River. The following year, they just arranged to not be playing on the Polo Grounds at the same time, but that was the original. Lasted through the 1880s, and its demise was despite the efforts of fans who signed a petition to save the Polo Grounds in 1889. But what was happening is that the city planned to put a street right through it. The Polo Grounds went from 110th to 112th Street, and the city was cutting the street right through it. Somebody who gets into Tammany Hall politics and all of that could probably say a lot about it, but they weren't able to save that. And the Giants had to open elsewhere. They played in New Jersey, they played down in Staten Island, but they were looking way uptown beyond 155th Street. And this was something that Bill Lamb, who's speaking next week, could really talk about the landowners, the team owners. Bill wrote a bunch of good essays on the landowners, team owners of the Giants and of the Polo Grounds. That was in the book, the anthology that I worked on a few years ago. And yes, I do make money from that one, so I definitely will shill that one. It's also as an outstanding article, my favorite from Dan, on the shooting of Barney Doyle at the Polo Grounds. And he spoke on that earlier. And I see that somebody else who contributed to the anthology, Tom Flynn, is on the call tonight. Tom is going to be speaking to this group, and sometime Gary can go over that about his great uncle. But here's where they were looking, and this is about where it ended up. You can see that it says most probable site. It was on the east side of 8th Avenue. That's not quite where it ended up. I think that's the Rucker basketball courts now, but the new ballpark went in just beneath the 155th Street Viaduct between 155th and what would be about 157th. And I call that Polo Grounds 2. The National League team played there in 1889 and 1890. And in 1890, there was another ballpark just to the north of it because the Players League started. And the New York Players League entry played in this ballpark known as Brotherhood Park. So in the foreground, we have Polo Grounds 2. This is an odd shape, and it was used for all sorts of things. You can see a football gridiron going across along with the diamond, but it was used for horse racing, things like that, equestrian stuff. There were reports of when games went on at the same time, and people could from one side could be looking over the fence and watching the other game. So in 1890, there were both ballparks going at it at the same time. And when the Players League died after the 1890 season, well, then the Giants, as they were by this time known, moved into the northern ballpark, and that became Polo Grounds 3. This is from David Hartman's A Walk through Manhattan, I think it is, and you see this oddly shaped round thing that they fit in whatever kind of sporting event that they had to, and then the what became Polo Grounds 3, and that remained the site of where the Giants played and where the Polo Grounds was into the 1960s. This became known as Manhattan Field, the one on the left, eventually a parking lot. But this was the new Polo Grounds 3, wooden structure, outfield view, and nice drawing of this, a very nice drawing that showed the shape. And it's got that bathtub shape, that odd shape that that the new one after the fire took on too. Why did they keep this weird shape? Well, again, by the book, by the anthology, because John Pasteur, a great expert on ballpark architecture, discusses that. And here is one more look at Polo Grounds 3 from the bluff. And then this one is dated at 1911. It had to be one of the first two games of the season in 1911 because it was after the second game that this happened. The fire, and you can see the grandstand and the outfield survived, but the ballpark burned down. John Brush, who we saw in there in that picture, that grumpy looking picture that Dan had of John Brush, probably had good reason to not feel real good at that time, although I think that was before the fire. By the time of the fire, John Brush was using a wheelchair. He had locomotive ataxia. Heartwarming story of him telling his wife, Elsie, that if she would stand by him, it would mean years of economy as he was going to fulfill his dream of building a concrete and steel version of this stadium. And the peace offerings between the American League team were already on because the Highlanders offered the use of Hilltop Park to the Giants while they were rebuilding the Polo Grounds. Hilltop Park, that's a nice shot of it that we can see the Hudson River beyond. If you get over to the Presbyterian, there's a Columbia Presbyterian Hospital at 163rd and Broadway. On the back side of it, there's a nice display with a home plate for that. And then this is just a picture I came across. So the Giants played there a little bit. This would have been the last year of Hilltop Park, because by the following year, the Highlanders, now by that time the Yankees, moved into the Polo Grounds with the Giants. And here we see the Polo Grounds, the new rebuilt steel and concrete, fireproof Polo Grounds soon after its opening in 1911. I'm not sure how far beyond it is. They opened the new ballpark less than 3 months after the other one burned. So it wouldn't have been totally complete. They were building it throughout the season. They hosted a World Series there that year. This one, I guess, is from the 1913 World Series. And some of Dan's shots had some better looks at the ornamentation on the facing of the upper deck and also the facing of the roof. This is pictures I picked out. This is about the only one that shows it. But this was kept the name, even though they were going to maybe call it Brush Stadium. It became Polo Grounds too. I'm glad it did, because it continued that tradition of the odd name for an odd stadium for another 50 years. By 1923, well, look what's happening. That left field grandstand is being extended. That nice ornamentation you see on the facing of the second deck is coming, you can see it at the far left, it's coming down. But this is when it was taking on the shape that I'm sure all of you knew, unless anybody can go back to the Polo Grounds pre-1923. The building of the huge building that housed the offices, the clubhouses, the locker room. The Eddie Grant Monument is already out there in that notch, but bringing the stadium, the grandstands almost together, and then having a couple of sections of bleachers surrounded by this building that created that notch that's been measured at anywhere from 475 to 483 feet from home plate. And look what we see here. They're still working on that construction, but what do you see in the distance, in the center, kind of to the top, Yankee Stadium there. So that happened in 1923. Yankee Stadium was built. Two teams played in the World Series that year. And there they are. That's how close they are. They call it a Subway Series when they played there, and various times, 23, 36, 37, 51. But I've walked the distance. I've parked over here for Yankee games and walked across the McCombs Dam Bridge to get to Yankee Stadium. A lot of great shots, aerial shots. I love them all, but showing these two stadiums together. And here it is after they completed the construction. It's sort of at a drab gray. We see Yankee Stadium in the distance. There's that big clubhouse building, nothing on it at this time. They've had advertising on it, different things. And there's a nice aerial shot of the same thing that really shows that horseshoe, the short distances down the foul lines, the long distance to center. And the shape of it is what everybody knows. Would this home run have landed as a home run any other place, as Andy Pafko looks up? There was some debate on it. Somebody claims, well, remember Bobby Thompson hit a line drive. It had to be a line drive because that upper deck overhung the lower deck. If there was any angle on the fly ball, it would have landed in the upper deck. I went to John Pasteur again, who said he thinks it might have traveled a little over what the marker is there, 315 feet, and would not have been out in most ballparks. This one would have been out in a lot of ballparks. 1954. How far away was Willie when he caught that ball? Well, there's a lot of exaggerations. 440, 460 feet. It was in excess of 400 feet. And everybody knows too, it wasn't just the catch. It's the way that he turned and fired that ball back in so that Larry Doby on second base, who was able to tag and go to third, but by Mays getting the ball in quickly, it managed to keep Doby from scoring. And then that left it tied into extra innings. And this, we all know, any other ballpark, this ball Dusty Rhodes, it would not have been out. There's Dave Pope, the outfielder, jumping for it, 257 feet down the line, so a little farther out, and just cleared the fence. That's the nature of the Polo Grounds, how it gave and took away. Love it or not, you'll hear different opinions on what people think of it. So the Giants and the Dodgers left after 1957. It was thought that was it for these places as baseball stadiums. Both Ebbets Field and the Polo Grounds were used for all other things, including they put in tracks to race cars. But the Polo Grounds got a new life thanks to this guy and his mates, Marvelous Marv, and the Mets came along. And they were going to play here just in 1962 while the new stadium was being built in Flushing. It wasn't ready. They had to play there in 1963. They spruced the place up again. They got advertising back onto the outfield walls, which I think was a little more scenic than just the bare walls. And I just love this score, but this is maybe my favorite version of it. First, that red of the Rheingold ad, this adds some real splash of color. And for the first time, that was used as a scoreboard. That was an overlay that's on there. You can look in the middle there where they have a big opening, so you can still have the windows and things, but they built this overlay that they put over that they could put the lineups and the score. So that was the final version of the Polo Grounds. Played its final Mets game in September 1963. There was a Latin American All-Star game the following month. And then here's about as sad a picture as you're ever going to see. So that's a lot of pictures of the demolition of the Polo Grounds. And that one makes you sad for sure. But this is where that Titanic game played, on some pretty hallowed ground that on this site with a couple of different ballparks from 1889, just the whole area under Coogan's Bluff up to 1963. My favorite ballpark, when I get my time machine, that's the first place I'm going.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Stu. I'll open up the questioning, and then whoever has a question, just raise your hand via the screen. But gentlemen, really fabulous. I got two quick questions. One's for Dan. Dan, what was the capacity? You said, I think 14,000 people showed up for the game. What was the capacity at the Polo Grounds at the time?
I don't know exactly. I do know that the crowd of 14,000, I guess 14,083, that was about 66%, 63, 66% more than an average crowd there, which was usually like in the 8,000s. Stu might possibly know the capacity of that. I don't know.
No, I don't. I don't. And I'm offhand not even thinking about what it was in the end after they extended those double decks in both directions with the bleachers. That held in excess of 50,000, I think. But at the time, and I think they had pretty much completed what they were going to complete at that time by the 1912 season. I'd have to look a little bit deeper, open that encyclopedia again to see just exactly what the capacity was at the time of it.
And was the money, the donations, did that exceed what they thought, or was it less?
Kind of, I don't think that's really answerable, because I don't know how you can guesstimate what it's going to be. I mean, you're taking an event where you don't know how many people will show up, and then you don't know what, there's the donation. You have, basically, one thing I probably forgot to mention is they didn't really charge admission to this game. You didn't have to buy a ticket. What you would do is you would buy a program, and that would allow you to go into the ballpark, and all the program purchases would go to the Titanic funds. And it was also, unreserved seating. So other than a few people who had some box seats, like the New York Female Giants, whatnot, but if you bought the program and you got in there, you could sit basically wherever you want. And it was still kind of a work in progress too. I mentioned Cohen, who was there and selling newspapers, but his efforts continued on in the days, and also a lot of other relief efforts. And it's kind of like a lot of relief efforts. There's that the top of the bell curve where everybody gives right away, but then there's still some things still trickling out and trickling out and trickling out and trickling out. But I don't really know if that's more than what they thought or not.
Thanks, Dan. And Stu, the pictures were great. I especially loved the one of the clubhouse being built. I never saw that. That was awesome. Thanks so much for sharing that.
I love, I collect them, you know, I just love anytime I see a Polo Grounds picture, I grab it.
All right, let's go to Dave Lippman. You're up.
Hey, Stu, that was a fantastic presentation, and I love the illustrations. My understanding is that the Eddie Grant plaque was nicked by a police officer who took it to his home in New Jersey and put it under his bed, and it stayed there for a great number of years. And then his son found it there. Can you shed any light on this theory?
Well, when the first book I did on the Polo Grounds and came out in 2000, Ev Parker, who was a New York City police officer, gave me his opinion on it with just his experience that apparently a couple of cops took it away from kids who were carting it off in 1957 after the final Giants game. And he said, but if they would have taken it into the precinct and tried to turn it in, they'd probably, by the desk guy, would get chewed out because the desk guy was not going to want to enter it. So Ev's best guess was that it was, probably was in some cop's basement or attic. And I don't know if they ever, I think there's a replica of it, but I don't know if that one ever turned up. Some of the other ones, Al Blazis, Jack Lummis, the other plaques, the Eddie Grant was on that pedestal. The others were on the wall. A couple of those original ones for football and baseball have turned up, but I don't know since 2000 when I did the first Polo Grounds book, if been any new light on that, but I liked what Ev Parker's scenario was for it, and he really had some good insights as a New York cop back at that time.
Thanks, Dave. One comment about Eddie Grant. One of our members, Karen Marco, she wrote a biography on Grant. Should be out hopefully by the end of the summer, and she'll be one of our speakers. So, Steve, I think you had your hand up.
Yes, my question was basically the same as Dave. As far as I know, and I know I've spoken to Perry a bunch of times. I think she left. It's never been found. It's so difficult to understand how that could have. It was so big how that could have disappeared. Great presentation, and you see these people. What different times everybody was on the same page. They were able to put this thing together, and no politics and whatnot. What a great thing! But great presentation, guys. Thank you so much.
Robert, you're up. Unmute, Robert.
There we go. Question for Dan is, has anyone ever found any video of that game? You mentioned that there were film crews there, and of course, newsreels were starting to come to theaters at that time. But does anyone know of any video that was shot at that game?
Thanks for your question. I actually saw that in the chat when I finished, and that's a good question. I didn't come across anything. I suppose it's possible that there's something out there. I didn't find anything, and unfortunately, the pictures that I found, you saw the New York female Giants. There were a couple other pictures. Like actually, the picture of McGraw and Wolverton, that is from the game. When they came out, they were introduced and they shook hands. But I kept finding basically the same 3 or 4 pictures: the Wolverton McGraw one, the George Cohen one, and the New York female Giants one. There could be other pictures out there. I just don't know where they are. I guess if I was to write a book about it, I would get a bigger rake and go out and about. But it was just an article, so I just ran out of time to find more. But there wasn't anything that I found. I'd give anything to see the footage of it. But there is footage from that time of other things, so you can kind of get a sense of how people dressed and whatnot. would have been nice to have a 2-minute YouTube clip of that.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there's something hidden away at the, New York Public Library somewhere, or who knows? I mean, they find all kinds of stuff in people's garages and attics through the years.
I encourage you to go to the New York Library and find that and then share it with the group. It's there somewhere. It's out there somewhere.
Thank you, Robert. Mr. Fracchia, you're up.
Yes, I actually had a question. So this was an exhibition game. Were they already playing in the regular season and they took a day off to play this game? And how did it impact kind of the rest of the season? Did they just push it one game forward?
It was an exhibition game during the season. It was the 1912 season. The Yankees had already played 6 games. They had lost all of them. They'd already had spring training. They basically got rained out of spring training. It rained every day. They were in Georgia, and it rained almost every day. So when they came to New York to start playing, I kind of went on and on about how bad the Yankees were, but also they were definitely impacted by just this horrible rainstorm, and they were basically having their spring training during the season. So they played the 6 games. They lost those. Then they had the Sunday game. Then they played the other games. They didn't cancel any games to fit this one in. I don't really know. I mean, it might have delayed the season for a day. I don't really know how that worked, but it was during the game, or it was in the season, and it probably wouldn't have had to really modify much of the schedule anyway, because teams didn't play on Sunday. So there's an open date.
All right. So then
open date right there.
Sense. Okay.
And that's probably where they just popped it in there, and then they had an open slot.
Okay. All right. I just wasn't sure. And thank you for clarifying that.
Thank you, Charles. Mrs. Mays, you're up.
2 great presentations. And here's my question about George. Are you talking about George M. Cohan?
Yes, I am.
Yes.
Oh, he's that famous. He was portrayed by what's his name in the
James
Cagney,
Cagney.
James Cagney.
Randy, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
That was the movie Yankee. Okay, that's my answer. All right.
Over
Yeah.
there, over there.
There you go.
The
Right.
Matarooms, Broadway.
Yeah. He was really an icon of New York at that time. I mean, he's still known even today, perhaps more obscurely, but he is known. But he was he was probably about as big as you would get on Celebrity Row in New York at that time. So the fact that he took time to really, put his heels on the ground and go around and just sell newspapers. We don't have the times now where people go out and sell newspapers. But I'm trying to imagine some event that would happen right now where Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos would like pound the pavement and do something. And I'm not trying to disparage them, but it's just it's a different time. It's a very different time.
His statue was in Times Square.
Right.
Cohen.
Herald Square, right? Or is it Times?
Times Square.
Herald Square.
Herald Square.
Herald Square? Okay.
Remember me
No,
to
no,
Herald
no.
Square.
It's in Duffy Square. That's
Duffy
the
Square. Duffy Square.
Yeah, the square north of time. There are 2 angles there. Duffy Square is the northern one. That's named after Father Duffy with the fight in '69. The statue is George M. Cohan.
That's where the office Tix is to buy Broadway theater tickets.
And I got one quick question before we go to Norm. So you talked about Mr. Doyle and you talked about the Titanic. What's his fascination with death and you writing?
I'm the death guy. I'm the one with the fascination. Death.
Gary, I really tried to find out that the Titanic didn't happen. I combed a lot, but I couldn't find any evidence. Like it really is a real story. There's no other side of the story. So
It's not some
Really,
QAnon
both of you,
thing, is it?
Fantastic job. Storm and Norman, you're up.
Okay, first I just want to thank both of you for a wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed it. Stu, I've got a question for you. You had mentioned a display at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital with home plate for the Hilltop Ballpark. I had been there in 2017 looking for that display, and someone had told me that it was taken down because they're doing landscaping. He took me where the plate was supposed to be. Is that all that stuff back now?
Oh, good question, because I haven't been back there since that time. You know, it's on the back side of the hospital. The front is on Broadway, and then you go, it's at 163rd, you go around back. If they've taken it down, I sure as heck hope it's going to go back up. And you know what? That's a question I might ask. In the Society for American Baseball Research, they have that new landmarks committee.
Yeah, we put that there.
Yeah, and that's gonna, New York's, the guy who's doing New York, I told him about where Joe DiMaggio and Marilyn Monroe had their honeymoon. It's in the Lexington. He's gonna, you know, lots of stuff to get there. I'm covering Minnesota. And one of the things that they want to know is if the display is active. You know, we have a plaque for Nicollet Park, the Giants farm team in Minneapolis, and the bank where the plaque is burned in the riots following George Floyd's murder, and there it's in storage. I hope maybe they're just doing some landscaping there. I can't imagine that they would just say, we're gonna trash this, you know. I mean, there's interest in it, and I wasn't aware of that, Norm. Thanks for letting me know, and maybe I'll check even with the landmarks committee, and somebody can find out, or if somebody's.
If you find out, would you let Gary know? So
yeah, for sure. Although if there's somebody in New York who can get up there, I'm trying to, you know, think the last time I've been up to, you know, that area. Well, actually, we just sort of drove by it, but I didn't think to do that. But maybe somebody who's in New York, if you get up there and can check it out or see what's happening. I'm very interested in that too. I sure as heck hope they've got something. And the marker for the Polo Grounds too, we were there in 2019. We were going out to see the Gopher football team play at Rutgers. Did some grave hunting. I'm the guy with the grave obsession north of New York. Came down and finally were able to park down along the river and walk down to the Polo Grounds site. I wanted to show it to these other guys. That was all under construction and torn up, and I didn't even see that plaque. So I certainly hope that the plaque that for the Polo Grounds that is within the Polo Grounds towers, I hope that that's still on display.
Oh, that's there.
Hey, Gary, while we're on the topic of landmarks and plaques, I would encourage people in the audience, the New Yorkers, if you go onto Google and you just Google New York City and Titanic, or New York City and Titanic Memorial or whatnot, you'll find a number of interesting websites that kind of show where some of these events with the Titanic took place and what they look like then and what they look like now. Way beyond my time to cover it today, but for people who live back there, I think you'd find it very interesting. I did, and I've only been to New York a handful of times.
I was born at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital, so I had seen the plaque years ago.
Stu, what is the exact address of that, by the way? Hilltop Park marker.
163rd and just off Broadway. I mean, it's the hospital is 163rd and Broadway, but it's on the Hudson River side of the property.
So it's north of the Polo Ground site, correct?
Yeah, but not by a lot. It's really
Northwest.
It's a pretty easy walk.
Right.
You know, if you were going to be going there. I'm jealous, Mars. You're born on the site of an historic ballpark. I was born in the same hospital as Prince, the singer.
Oh, that's cool.
No, I'd rather have a ballpark as my starting point. Dan, I don't know that much about the Titanic, but when we were in Halifax, Nova Scotia, a lot of the Titanic victims are buried there, and in fact, they even have they've made the gravestones kind of into the shape of a ship. So that's where the bodies went, or what was the deal with that?
I can answer that, being a Titanic fan, among other things.
Go for it.
The White Star Line chartered a ship called the McKay Bennett to go to the point where the Titanic was sunk, according to the Carpathia's captain's calculations. When they got there, they found hundreds and hundreds of bodies floating around in the Pacific, in the Atlantic, in their life vests, and obviously they were dead. Among them was John Jacob Astor, who was identified by a ring. And the ones they couldn't identify or were too mangled, they buried at sea. But they brought the bulk of them home to Halifax, and they were put in a cemetery that the White Star Line maintained And then when White Star was bought out by Cunard, Cunard has been maintaining the graves ever since. The identified Jews from Titanic were put in a Jewish cemetery in a synagogue there. And a lot of the bodies from Titanic headed southeast, and they were encountered by the German liner Frankfurt, which was coming up from the southeast. And they just basically didn't know what to do. They didn't want to bring them aboard, and they didn't have anywhere to put them. So they just sailed on past. It's an incredible, the whole story of Titanic is incredible.
Hold on one second. There we go. Okay. Anybody else with any questions?
Yeah.
Say it sank was the opening.
We'll go to George and then Renee and Steve.
Yeah.
George,
Thank you,
go ahead.
fellas. First of all, thank you for your presentations. I see that Perry is left and also Eddie Dugan, but Mo Resner and his son Eddie are still here. I don't know whether they know about the video of the last game played at the Polo Grounds by the Giants in 1957.
I have that. I have Mo's video.
Okay, great.
And I might add, please go to YouTube and Google Requiem for an Arena, I think it is.
Yeah.
That is just awesome. I love that thing. So, you know, we might not have video of the Titanic game like Bob had asked about, but you know what Mo has, that's well worth getting. And but Requiem for an Arena, I think.
Dude, do you remember? I've seen that, and it was a very famous narrator. I forgot who it was, though.
It is.
Howard
So,
Cosell.
oh.
Howard Cosell.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Oh,
Why don't they let Haywood Bruin do it? That would have been better.
Ed, are you sure it's Howard Cosell?
Well, I trust my memory, yes.
Okay.
I don't think
Howard
it's Howard
thought it was.
Cosell.
Yeah, I
No,
didn't
but
think
it
was
is.
either.
It's a guy with a deep voice, though, but it's not Howard Cosell.
You guys keep talking. You guys keep talking. I'm gonna find that. Okay.
All right, let's go to Renee.
Thanks, Gary. Guys, that was a great presentation. I really enjoyed it. Very fascinating and stuff. But Stu, I got a question. I love ballparks. I love looking at old ballparks and what they started out with and what they evolved into. One of the unique things that looking at these pictures, you remind me, I haven't done this in a long time. I get frustrated when I go to sites and they talk about scoreboards. And when they go to the Polo Grounds, it's always, you know, the latter years of the Polo Grounds when the Mets were there. Never, I don't think I remember ever seeing anything on the left and or right field side of the Polo Grounds. A really good photograph of a really good sharp photograph of that scoreboard. Do you have anything like that?
Yeah. Well, I'm like you, Renee. I collect them off the internet or anywhere else I can get them. And I've got like on a drive, old ballparks separated by you know, ballpark, the Polo Grounds, and I've got one folder for scoreboards. And unfortunately, I'll send these to Gary and he can distribute them or something. There's a couple that I've got that show that one on the left field facing of the upper deck, real kind of nothing much to it. I think it could show the lineups and the line score. That's why I kind of like, when I get my time machine, I'm going to 62 or 63. I want to see the Polo Grounds in its final years. I'd love to see those amazing Mets of that period. And but just that splash of red that they have when they did make the center field into a scoreboard. So many ballparks, this is something that the Polo Grounds didn't really have as a classic scoreboard. They didn't, you know, Ebbets Field, and of course that was in the concave wall of Tiger Stadium later on. I just love pictures of the scoreboards. But I'm gonna, when we're done, I'll send this to Gary.
Yeah, because there was some years ago. I mean, quite a few years ago. I forgot the company, but they were selling scoreboards. They advertised Forbes Field, Ebbets Field, and when I looked at the Polo Grounds that they had, it was really, the school, the clubhouse and the clock. That was it, And I was kind of disappointed. I mean, I bought it. I love it. I still have it, but no scoreboard, I was just curious.
Well, here, can I share? If I share my screen here, will this do it? By the way, Horace McMahon narrated.
Naked City, yeah.
Yeah, it was he did Naked City. He did that Requiem.
Yeah,
for-
Ed, Howard Cosell produced it.
There, I know his name is on. Okay, there you go.
Wow. Wow, that's a good shot.
See, I stole that from Life magazine.
This
Only
39 is
best.
Campanella, right?
Wow.
Yeah, that's Campanella going in, and look at that. It had line scores for out of town games. It had the batting orders in there, and
it looks like there's some color in there too. On the road games.
Well, on the road games, yeah, you're right, to the right. And you know what? I'll take this. I just, in our chapter Saber newsletter, had a column last column written by this guy who died right afterwards. He was 82, in the opening of the Metrodome and its fancy scoreboard. And he said, I'd trade that for the Met Stadium scoreboard, which couldn't do all that much, but that was the good thing, because all the crap that they put on these scoreboards now, and then the information that you want is missing. So this is a pretty basic scoreboard.
Looks cool to me. Looks cool to me.
And I don't even know if you were sitting on that side, what you did, because I'm not even sure what they had on the right field side for.
I think it's the same thing, but in the opposite,
the opposite direction.
I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like I said, I the pictures I have seen in the past barely shows this, barely. So,
Yeah, it was, I just keep, heck, I'm on Facebook and there's all those good pages for the Polo Grounds, Yankee Stadium, Sabre Ballparks.
Wow.
Renee, are those the Rangel houses?
Looks like.
It could be, because, the Polo Ground apartments, of course, were put where the stadium is. But there's another complex after it.
That was the rail yards that became later on, had the high rises that then eventually encompassed both sides of the Polo Grounds too. And let me ask you experts on this, because I know that it was open there. You can see right through on left field. Was that the same? Was that open between the decks where you could look outside on the right field side as well?
I don't know, because wasn't that the ramp entrance to the subway?
Oh, that was on the.
So I don't know. Wasn't it? I'm not sure.
What year is this picture?
What's that?
What year is this picture?
Well, sometime 40s, 50s, if they're playing Brooklyn with that lineup.
It's definitely after 1948, because Campanella is in the game, and the 9th Avenue well has been torn down and replaced by Colonial Park. Before Colonial Park was there, that was the train yard for the 9th Avenue elevated.
Well, 54 through 57, I don't remember the scoreboard.
49 to 57. Well, yeah.
It's got Milwaukee, so it's after 50.
It's got
Milwaukee's up there.
Milwaukee, so 53. After 53, you could look with retro sheet. I'm sure we could look up, and in fact, it is 1953. I have it labeled, and if I just spent 5 minutes with retro sheet, we could get the exact date of that game, having the out of town scores, the lineup, and then that line score up to that point.
Is it possible they only
Dude,
have it 1 year?
If you could send some of those pictures to Gary.
Yeah, let me do that.
Thank you so much.
And I'll find the exact date on this game. It really would not be, you got the out of town score, Athletics at the Red Sox,
and real quickly, I'm curious, how long does it go?
Philadelphia.
How far does the extension of the scoreboard go through? You know what I'm saying? I mean, it looks like it abruptly ends on the right side. So is there more?
They're able to get balls and strikes up there. That looks like it's hand operated or something.
Yeah, it looks like it. Yeah.
And I'll get the date and I'll send this one to Gary, and he can.
Oh, thank you.
Send it with the group. Obviously, don't put this in a publication without permission of Life magazine, but
Not
You
at
know,
all.
it's,
No way.
it's,
Wow.
you know, I just collect these things for my own enjoyment, and
So do I. I've never seen this.
well, just go to, you know, get on the Polo Grounds, Yankee Stadium pages on Facebook, and when they come up, do a right click on it and save the picture. And I've got a ton of them.
I think what really strikes me about this picture, Stu, is if you just take just this look, you would think that this was a ballpark that was actually just built like in the 50s. Like, even though this was done before, this style kind of aged in the 50s. I mean, this looks like something that Philip Johnson or Mies van der Rohe would build in the 1950s, whereas that's really not the case. So the architectural ornamentation, or the lack of it really, just kind of geared right into the 50s, and all of the stuff from 1912 is gone. Almost all of it, other than maybe like the New York Giants symbol on the seat railing. They really stripped it down and just made it go with flat lines and curves, and that's it.
Well, yeah, I don't know what behind the plate. Janet Marie Smith spoke to us, and she had, you know, Camden Yards remodeling, Dodger Stadium, and on Fenway Park, just asking her, what part of Fenway Park, if you go there, what part goes back to 1912? And she said, really just a section right behind the plate, like if you're in the concourse right behind home plate. And that would be interesting. When I go into Williams Arena, which is 95 years old in Minneapolis, I try to look and say, what parts of these were here in 1928 when they built it? And so here we have in the 50s, it went another 10 years. What was there when they built it?
When did the Browns move to Baltimore?
54.
They're on there as St. Louis against Cleveland.
Yeah, so that would be 53. That's, I think, and I've got this labeled as 53, but I am going
I don't remember
to.
in 56 or 57. I think they took it
Well,
down.
there's no, William Mays is not playing, so. Was he in the
Well,
military? He
yeah,
was in the military,
That could be
53, that's
53
right.
because
He
he's
was in the
gifted.
military.
He was
Yeah.
in the army.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll get an exact date on it and label it, and I'll send this one to Gary, and he can share.
So I
it
know
with
you, I don't know if you can see this because the screen's shared, but
Okay, let me stop.
It's got to be 53. It has to
I
be.
know you love
Oh, that's a good
stadiums,
shot.
and I don't know if this is too cartoonish for you, but I bought this when it came out. It's a fabulous publication by the.
Oh, I've got that. That's got the Gene Mack photos.
Yeah, and it's got the Polo Grounds cartoon, and
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Saturday Stadium. It's a wonderful book.
There's a couple of versions of that too, from when Gene Mack did that in about the 40s, and then later updated it to get in Willie's catch and some of that stuff. I think I've got the complete collection of the 14 ballparks that were around at that time that Gene Mack did those drawings. I take anything. I just, love anything I can get my hands on with that: diagrams, maps, photos, drawings, paintings.
Stu, real quick, one last question. Aside from the Polo Grounds, is there a favorite old ballpark you'd like to go to?
My order is, with my time machine, Polo Grounds, Ebbets Field, and then it would be Crosley, Forbes, and Connie Mack, maybe in that order. Crosley before 1960, when they still had those buildings across the street.
Because I was fortunate enough in the 80s to go to Comiskey Park.
Yes.
Wrigley before any advertising.
Yep.
Tiger Stadium. And I forgot the name, where the Orioles played. Memorial
Stadium.
Love them all. Love them all. It was,
me too.
And I barely remember old Yankee Stadium before they renovated.
I was happy that I
there.
got to 2 games in '73 at Yankee Stadium. I was thrilled, Renee, to get to Memorial. When I grew up in the 60s watching the Twins, well, all of those American League ballparks, and I got to every one of those except for Kansas City. So even getting a Memorial Stadium, but Tiger and Comiskey are classics. But my first trip to Wrigley was '72, before it was yuppified, before they built bleachers on top of the buildings, when people just who lived there brought their folding chairs up with their friends and watched it. And Wrigley remains my favorite, but I'm glad it's still going in Fenway, and the only way that those 2 ballparks stay in existence is to upgrade, and we have to accept that or just say we don't have them. But any of those. But yeah, of the 14 ballparks that were in existence at the mid 20th century, I think I was at 6 of them, and then I got the 8 that I would love to get to, but Polo Grounds has always been the first stop.
You know, one last question. I'm sorry. Those ballparks, I did this, and I'm wondering if you did this too. We went there to go to the ballparks and see baseball. I was gone for almost 5 or 6 innings. I'm all over the place. Upper deck, mezzanine, wherever. Just get that Fenway was another one I went to in the early 80s. Loved all those old ballparks. I mean, I can't get enough of remembering that stuff. Did you do that kind of stuff yourself? I mean,
well, yeah,
get
but maybe
lost in the ballpark?
before the game,
Thank you.
But Met Stadium is the ballpark I grew up, and I knew all of the nooks and crannies, including the police room when I got arrested for getting drunk and climbing the foul pole. So, I took one for the team just to see that. Jerry Schwab, he'd be a great guy to have on if you can get him, and Ed Logan I might have his contact, Matty Schwab's son, because they lived there. And, had that apartment in left field under the stands. But talked to Jerry a couple of times, and he and the other kids, Chris DeRocher and Ed Logan, I think would have been with him. They'd camp out in the outfield when the team was gone. They'd pitch their sleeping bags. But he talked about how they take their bikes and ride up and down the ramps. Yeah. And I would not only love to go, I'd love to go to one game there, but I'd love to have grown up there like many of you did and know every nook and cranny of that ballpark the way I knew Met Stadium. Nothing classic about Met Stadium, but I have such fond memories of what you say, Renee, getting around there, seeing the innards of it, seeing it from every angle. If you can get a hold of Jerry Schwab and ask him to be on here, that would be a fascinating night.
I could tell you about the Polo Grounds, about if you go to like right field and towards right center, that's almost parallel to the McCombs Dam Bridge going across to the Bronx and Yankee Stadium. And then the Polo Grounds had a parking lot on the west side of the stadium, but they took that away and built a school. I believe it's PS 58. So that took away the parking.
Yeah,
Therefore, if you were a Giants fan, you had to park across by McCombs Dam Park and then walk or take the train one stop over to the Polo Grounds. And that turned out to be a killer, where you couldn't park on the Polo Grounds side, especially if you come from New Jersey or Connecticut.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, Ebbets Field too, and all of those from the classic period by post-war were in congested areas and were well served by public transportation, but not for parking. And that's post-war is where the ballparks started to get out away from the center city or the commercial areas, whether they in Minnesota that went all the way out to a suburb where it could be surrounded by that. But yeah, it's by the 50s, a ballpark without parking was, and now they've gone into the center city, but even there, those places with ramps or anything else have a lot of accessible parking.
Well, look at the Giants ballpark in San Francisco. It's a commuter ballpark. It's not for parking.
Yeah, and the San Francisco is probably one of the cities that can do that, where the people are, yeah, in fact, you take the BART and then you either walk down to the ballpark or there's a shuttle or something, but you're right.
That goes from several neighborhoods right to the ballpark.
Yeah. I loved walking. We went to DePaul University before a Cubs game and then walked up what was Sheffield Avenue, 20 blocks. I love that walk. It's there's not much parking around Wrigley, but that's another city that is really served by the public transportation. Just the surrounding area.
Steve, why don't you, last question, Steve?
Yeah. Stu, do you have that picture of Mays and Irvin doing the commercial for Chesterfield? Because I just saw the Chesterfield.
Oh, I don't. Is that a video?
You could probably Google it. I shared that with Monty's daughter, and she was laughing. My father never smoked a cigarette, and I'm sure Mays didn't either, but they got some extra money. Two names came up Jimmy Cagney and Roy Campanella. Nothing to do with tonight, but Cagney was one of the possibilities for the Jolson story. Cagney and Larry Parks and Gene Kelly, those were the three. They took the most unknown, Larry Parks. He did real well. The Campanella thing that comes up, that's probably the closest thing to this game where the Yankees played, flew across country to play in front of 91,000 people to honor Roy Campanella. I guess it was a fundraiser for him, and then flew back to the Bronx. I wonder if they'd ever do anything close to that now. That's what I'm saying, being on the same page. What a wonderful thing that was by the Yankees, the hated Yankees.
Historical note,
Yes,
1 degree of separation between James Cagney and me. We both had the same English teacher at Stuyvesant High School. 1918 and 1958. Next week, we have our 60th reunion. And the other footnote is that Dr. Kelly, who taught us English, also pitched against Grover Cleveland Alexander back around the time that Cagney was attending high school.
George, do you know Seth Hawkins from Stuyvesant High?
What year?
Seth, about 1960, 61.
Geez, I went there.
That's-
Class of 1980.
1980, okay, yeah, Seth is Dr. Fan. He's been to 73 ballparks and something like that. He's in St. Paul now, and they were known as the Peg Legs. Is that true?
That is true.
That is
right. And 61, one of my business partners actually was the class of 61, 1 year before me, which means he was a much wiser and serious gentleman. He's a year older. But yeah, Cagney got into Stuyvesant back in 18.
George, here's something might be interesting for you. Virginia Mayo said that in 1949, Raoul Walsh's White Heat, James Cagney was coerced by Raoul Walsh to play the gangster Cody Jarrett, which is moderately fashioned after the Ma Barker gang. She said he should have won Best Actor instead of the one he finally won for, which was George M. Cohan.
You'd all know why Virginia Mayo's name was on the fence at Ebbets Field.
Do I know why? No, but I know she was probably at that time the most sexy actress in Hollywood.
The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, I think, was advertised on that maybe at the time of Cookie Lavagetto's hit or something. I think I've seen that scoreboard during the 47 World Series, and was it Danny Kaye and Virginia Mayo, or not Danny, but I think they had an advertisement for The Secret Life of Walter Mitty with Virginia Mayo on Ebbets Field scoreboard, or else that's just a drug flashback. I don't know.
Listen, Stu and Dan, cannot thank you guys enough. What a wonderful presentation, knowledge on this. So we want to just give a nice round of applause to our guys. I would say don't be